Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey into the frozen heart and forgotten corners of British Columbia. Through isolated small towns, endless wilderness, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing, real, and terrifying small-town horror stories ever recorded. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of British Columbia, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Cole, and this happened when I was 27 years old, after I took a short-term contract restoring radio equipment in a dying logging town in northern British Columbia. The town didn't appear on most maps anymore. Just one road in, endless forest on every side. A place where silence pressed against your ears until you felt it breathing with you. I came for the money, not the scenery. There were fewer than 200 people left. They watched me closely, too closely, like I was interrupting something fragile. Conversation stopped when I entered rooms. Radios were everywhere, in homes, in shops, even nailed to trees, rusted and dead. The mayor told me the signal problem started years ago. The radios turn on by themselves, he said, laughing too hard. They listen when they shouldn't. That night, alone in my rented cabin, my radio clicked on at 2:17 a.m. No station, just breathing. Slow, patient, like it already knew my name. I told myself it was interference, old wiring, forest moisture. That's what professionals say when fear creeps in quietly. But the next morning, every local I spoke to asked the same question. Did you hear it yet? At the diner, an old woman gripped her coffee so hard her knuckles whitened. She leaned in close and whispered, "Don't answer it. It learns voices." I laughed. I shouldn't have. That afternoon, I examined the town's main broadcast tower. The equipment was outdated, but something was wrong. The transmitters were receiving signals, not broadcasting them. Signals coming from deep inside the forest, far beyond any legal range. That night, the radio turned on again. This time, it wasn't breathing. It was speaking. Not words, at first. Just the sound of someone walking through leaves, stopping, listening, then walking closer. And then, clearly, in my own voice, it said, "Ethan, I know where you're hiding." I didn't sleep. By morning, 3 radios outside my cabin were turned toward my door. By the 3rd day, I understood one thing clearly. This town wasn't afraid of the radios. They were afraid of me noticing them. I went door to door under the excuse of maintenance checks. Inside every home, radios sat powered on but muted, facing inward like household idols. No music, no news, just waiting. When I asked when the broadcasts started behaving strangely, people avoided eye contact. A man named Calvin, a former logger, finally spoke. He said the town used to run a nightly radio show to keep loneliness away. Then, one winter, voices began answering back, voices that weren't callers. Calvin told me the forest learned them slowly. Accents first, laughter next, then names. That evening, I found recordings in the broadcast station archives, tapes labeled with dates but no hosts. When I played one, I heard the town, exactly as it sounded tomorrow. Conversations that hadn't happened yet, including my own. On the tape, I was screaming. Behind me, the radio clicked on by itself. That night, the town held a meeting without inviting me. I watched from my truck as lights flickered on in the community hall. Radios glowed through the windows like candles at a vigil. I should have left then. Instead, I followed. Inside, the mayor spoke calmly. He said the forest listened because the town taught it to. Years of voices, years of loneliness. Something out there learned to repeat them, and now it needed new ones to survive. They all turned toward me. I realized the radios weren't pointed at homes for comfort. They were pointed inward to keep something out. The ones outside my cabin weren't warning me, they were directing it. The mayor offered me a deal. Stay. Speak nightly on the radio. Let the forest learn my voice instead of theirs. When I refused, every radio in the hall turned on at once. My voice echoed from every speaker, begging to stay. I ran. Behind me, the forest repeated my footsteps perfectly. I didn't make it far. The road out of town twisted through dense forest, and within minutes, my radio crackled to life again. I had unplugged it, thrown it into the back seat. It didn't matter. The sound came from everywhere. Trees, gravel, air itself. Ethan, my voice said calmly, as if practicing. You forgot something. The headlights began catching shapes between the trunks. Not people, not animals. Just outlines that moved a second too late, mimicking the way I shifted in my seat or turned my head. Every time I accelerated, the sound of my engine followed me, perfectly, half a second behind. Then the road ended. Not abruptly, gently. Asphalt thinning into dirt, dirt into moss, moss into forest floor, as if the town had never needed an exit. My phone had no signal, but the radio signal was perfect, clearer than ever. It played conversations from my past, my mother, my friends, things I'd said alone. The forest wasn't chasing me, it was rehearsing me. I spent the night in the truck, engine off, lights dead, trying not to breathe too loudly. Every sound I made returned to me, delayed, softened, improved, like an echo that wanted to be real. Just before dawn, the radio spoke again. Not as me this time. It used Calvin's voice. He told me the truth. The forest didn't kill people. It replaced them. Those who accepted the deal stayed in town, speaking nightly, slowly fading as the forest perfected their sound. When the imitation was complete, the real person walked into the trees, smiling, relieved. The town survived by feeding it voices. By morning, I understood why the people watched me so closely. I wasn't an outsider anymore. I was the next broadcast. As sunlight broke through the trees, I heard my own voice drifting from deep in the woods, calling softly for help. It sounded calmer than I felt, and it knew exactly where I was hiding. By the second night, exhaustion broke something inside me. Fear stopped screaming and became quiet, logical, persuasive. The forest didn't feel hostile anymore. It felt patient. I followed the sound of my own voice deeper between the trees. With every step, the forest grew unnaturally familiar, as if it had memorized itself just for me. Branches bent aside. Roots no longer tripped me. It wanted me to walk comfortably. Then I saw them, figures standing perfectly still between the trunks. Not shadows, copies. Their faces were wrong, unfinished, like masks still being carved. When one of them turned its head, it did so exactly how I would have. The radio voice spoke again, calm and reassuring. It said the town would finally sleep once I joined the signal. No more fear, no more listening. For the first time, I understood the temptation to stop running, to let something else carry my voice. Behind me, the town's lights flickered, waiting. Ahead of me, the forest inhaled. I survived because I did the one thing the forest didn't expect. I stayed silent. I smashed every radio I could find, mine, the ones nailed to trees, the ones hidden under roots. The forest screamed back in broken voices, distorted and angry, unable to finish its sentences. At dawn, I walked out along a road that hadn't existed the night before. The town was gone. No buildings, no people. Just concrete foundations swallowed by moss and rusted radios half buried in the soil, still humming quietly, still listening. Authorities said it was an abandoned settlement erased by time. No records, no missing persons, no Calvin, no mayor. But sometimes, late at night, when the world goes quiet, my phone picks up a signal. It plays a broadcast from British Columbia. A calm voice introduces the show. It sounds exactly like me, and it's asking new listeners to stay a while. For months after I escaped, I tried to convince myself it was over. I moved south, changed numbers, took work that kept me around people, noise, anything that drowned out silence. But silence had learned me too well. Every radio I passed, cars at stoplights, kitchens through open windows, felt wrong, tuned slightly toward me, waiting. Once, in a grocery store, the overhead music cut out, and a calm male voice whispered my name over the speakers. My knees nearly gave out. I started recording myself while I slept, terrified I was talking back without knowing it. Most nights were quiet, until one recording caught something else, breathing that didn't match mine, followed by a soft imitation of my laugh, improving each time it repeated. The forest hadn't lost my voice. It had simply let me borrow it. And now, far from British Columbia, I realized something colder than fear. It didn't need the town anymore. I'm telling this story now because last week, the broadcast changed. A late-night program aired on an unregistered frequency. No station name, no ads, just a familiar voice welcoming listeners home. The show invited people to call in and be heard. Authorities traced it to nowhere. The signal didn't bounce. It didn't travel. It waited. Last night, it played a news segment. A man describing a forest town in British Columbia, describing radios, describing me, perfectly. Even the things I never told anyone. Then the host laughed softly and said, "He thinks he escaped." My phone vibrated. No number, just static. I haven't spoken aloud since, because if it hears me again, if it finishes learning, I don't think it will send me back this time. And somewhere, deep in the forest, something is practicing how to say goodbye. My name is Lucas Harding, and this happened when I was 32, after I accepted a wildlife survey job near a remote river town in interior British Columbia. The place was called Greyhaven, a settlement built along a wide, slow-moving river that locals said never froze completely, no matter how brutal the winter became. I was there to track salmon patterns, but from the first night, it was clear the river was the real focus of the town. Every house faced the water. Every window overlooked it. People spoke quietly, as if loud voices carried too far. The mayor warned me never to throw anything into the river. Not trash, not stones, not words spoken in anger. Sound carries, he said, and it remembers. I laughed then. I didn't later. That night, as I set up my equipment by the riverbank, the water rippled without wind. Shapes formed briefly beneath the surface, like letters dissolving before I could read them. From somewhere downstream, I heard my notebook pages turning by themselves. By the second day, I noticed everyone kept journals. Not diaries, records. Each resident carried a small waterproof notebook, sealed with twine. They wrote constantly, after conversations, after arguments, after dreams. When I asked why, a woman named Maribel told me the river listened better than people did. "It keeps score," she said. "We write so it doesn't have to guess." That afternoon, I found something lodged between rocks near the shore. A notebook, swollen, heavy. When I opened it, the pages weren't handwritten. The ink flowed like water, forming sentences as I watched. They described my arrival, my questions, my private thoughts from the night before, thoughts I had never spoken. I dropped the book into the river. The water went completely still. Then, slowly, the current reversed direction, flowing upstream. My radio crackled with a low, wet sound, like pages being torn underwater. Behind me, Maribel whispered, "Now it has to remember you instead." And the river began writing back. After that day, the town changed toward me. People still smiled, but it felt practiced, like they were following instructions. Conversations ended the moment I approached. Pens stopped moving. Pages were turned face down. That evening, I noticed fresh writing in my own field journal, entries I hadn't written. They were detailed observations of the townspeople, who avoided eye contact, who lingered near the river longest, who looked relieved when it rained. At the bottom of the page, a single line appeared in darker ink. "He is forgetting to listen." I confronted the mayor. He didn't deny anything. He said the river began keeping records decades ago after a flood wiped out half the town. The survivors promised it honesty, confessions, truth written down and offered freely. "The river remembers what we try to forget," he said, "and it punishes lies." That night, the water outside my cabin rippled again. I heard the sound of pages turning, slow, deliberate, coming from beneath the surface. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard scratching, pens moving, pages filling, water sloshing softly like breath. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of the riverbank lined with open books instead of stones. The next morning, Maribel showed me her notebook. She hadn't written in it for days. The river had taken over. Her pages were filled with confessions she swore she'd never made, cruel thoughts, buried regrets, moments of anger she barely remembered feeling. "It's correcting me," she said, trembling. "I left things out." By noon, she was gone. The townspeople said she walked into the river willingly, notebook held to her chest. They said the water accepted her, smoothed over like a finished sentence. That night, my journal gained another entry. It described Maribel's death in exact detail. At the end, one line waited, unfinished. Blank space, dripping ink, expecting my contribution. I tried to leave Greyhaven the next morning, but the road along the river no longer matched my maps. It curved where it used to run straight, hugging the water like it was being slowly rewritten. My GPS spun uselessly, recalculating without end. When I returned to town, every door was closed, curtains drawn, notebooks placed carefully on windowsills, facing the river like offerings. I found my journal again on the table inside my cabin. It was heavier now. The new entries weren't just observations, they were judgments. Detailed accounts of my mistakes, times I'd lied to myself, choices I regretted but never admitted aloud. The river wasn't angry, it was thorough. At the end of the latest page, it asked a question. "What are you hiding?" The ink trembled, pooling like it was impatient. Outside, the river's surface rippled with overlapping circles, as if countless invisible fingers were turning pages beneath the water. For the first time, I felt it wasn't waiting to punish me. It was waiting to be fed. I made a decision that still haunts me. I wrote back. I filled page after page with things I'd never told anyone. Jealousies, quiet cruelty, the truth about why I'd taken the job, to run from a life I'd already failed. As I wrote, the river calmed. The current softened, almost content. The final sentence formed on its own. Accepted. That night, the town came alive again. Lights returned. People spoke freely. Laughter drifted through the streets. I understood then, confession wasn't punishment, it was payment. At dawn, the mayor told me I was free to go. The road was straight again. My maps worked. But as I packed, my journal wrote one last line. We will need more. Months later, far from Greyhaven, I still wake up to wet pages beside my bed. Ink spreading slowly, forming new questions. The river doesn't chase you. It audits you. And it never closes its books. I thought distance would weaken it. Cities, concrete, noise, places where rivers were buried under steel and stone. But memory doesn't need water to flow. The first incident happened in Vancouver. I spilled coffee on my desk, and the stain spread in a shape that looked disturbingly familiar. Long, winding, deliberate. That night, my notebook appeared again, resting neatly on my kitchen table. I hadn't brought it with me. New entries filled the pages. They weren't about the town anymore. They were about the people around me, my coworkers, strangers on the bus, intimate details I couldn't possibly know, arguments they'd have tomorrow, secrets they hadn't admitted yet. I realized the truth too late. The river didn't just record confessions. It trained observers. By writing for it, I'd learned how to notice the same flaws it noticed, the same cracks, the same hidden truths. When I closed the journal, the ink bled through the pages anyway. You don't leave Greyhaven. You become an extension of its current. I tried to stop writing. The headache started immediately. Pressure behind my eyes. Thoughts piling up with nowhere to go. Every unspoken truth felt like it was drowning me from the inside. One night, half asleep, I found myself standing by a storm drain during heavy rain. Water rushed beneath the grate, dark and fast. I knelt without thinking and whispered a confession into the flow. Relief flooded me instantly. That's when I understood the final cruelty. The river didn't want honesty for morality's sake. It wanted continuity. It needed scribes everywhere. People trained to feed it truths wherever water touched the world. Greyhaven wasn't special. It was the source. Now, whenever I hear running water, my fingers itch. Words form, secrets surface. Somewhere, a ledger grows thicker. And if you're listening closely to this story, feeling something uncomfortable rise inside you, the river has already started taking notes. I began to notice patterns in the entries. Recurring symbols shaped like bends in a river. Margins filled with tiny marks resembling tally counts. The journal wasn't just recording truths anymore. It was organizing them. One night, an entry appeared describing a woman I'd passed on the street that afternoon. It detailed a choice she would make in 3 days, a betrayal she hadn't yet considered. I told myself it was coincidence. 3 days later, the news proved the journal right. That's when I realized the river wasn't documenting the present. It was proofreading the future. I burned the notebook in my bathtub, watching the pages curl and blacken. For a moment, I felt free. Then the smoke condensed into damp ash that stained the porcelain like ink. The next morning, a new notebook waited on my counter. Heavier, thicker. On the first page, written patiently, destruction noted, continuation required. Outside, rain began to fall. I'm telling this now because the river's reach is growing. Reservoirs, pipes, sewers, bottled water. Places we trust to be clean, controlled, harmless. It flows through all of them, quietly collecting what we refuse to say aloud. The journal no longer waits for me to write. It fills itself as I speak, as I think, sometimes before. Last night, I found an entry written in a handwriting I didn't recognize. It wasn't about me. It was about you. It described a moment of doubt, a secret you've never admitted, a truth pressing uncomfortably close as you listen. At the bottom of the page, the question appeared again. What are you hiding? I don't know how long I can keep carrying this. But now that you've heard the story, now that the water knows you were listening, someone will have to write it down, and the river always collects its due. My name is Harper Lane, and this happened when I was 29, working a temporary maintenance job at a lighthouse on the northern coast of British Columbia. The lighthouse stood on a jagged cliff, battered by wind and waves. It was abandoned for decades, but the town nearby kept it operational for emergencies. When I arrived, the locals warned me. No one stayed inside after dark. Not because of ghosts, but because of voices. The first night, I climbed the spiral staircase to inspect the beacon. The wind howled outside, but inside, it was almost quiet. Too quiet. Then faintly, a whisper rose from the darkness, soft enough to be carried away by the wind. Harper. I froze. The name wasn't spoken aloud by anyone I could see. The staircase seemed to bend, the shadows stretching unnaturally long. By the time I reached the top, I realized the whispers weren't coming from the walls. They were coming from the light itself. Names I didn't know. Names that shouldn't exist. And mine. The next day, the townspeople avoided the lighthouse entirely. The mayor warned me again, his tone unusually serious. It listens. It remembers. Don't stay after dark. I laughed at first, thinking it was local superstition. Maintenance was my job, and I wasn't about to be scared by wind and echoes. That night, I returned, determined to check the lens mechanism. The spiral staircase groaned under each step, and as I climbed higher, I noticed something impossible. Faint handprints on the railing, damp as if pressed moments ago. They weren't mine, and they glowed faintly in the lantern light. At the top, the beacon rotated. The shadows of the lighthouse stretched across the room, and I heard it again. A low, sibilant whisper repeating names. Old ones, new ones. Some I recognized from the nearby town. Then it whispered mine clearly, lingering on my syllables, like it had memorized me. And the light flashed, illuminating a figure I hadn't noticed before. Standing at the edge of the railing, staring at me. I couldn't move. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat echoing louder than the storm outside. The figure didn't speak. It simply stared, a dark silhouette outlined by the swinging light. I thought it was a person, but something about it wasn't right. Its shadow stretched too long, bending over walls and railings unnaturally. And I noticed my own name being whispered again, this time in multiple voices. I stumbled backward and nearly fell down the stairs. The whispers followed me, repeating names I didn't recognize, some older than the town itself. Then one whispered distinctly, "You will join us." I ran to the beacon room door, but it wouldn't budge. The figure stepped closer, moving silently across the light beams. The floorboards creaked beneath it, but no shadow fell on them. I realized then, it didn't need to walk. The lighthouse wasn't just abandoned, it had been waiting. And now, it was awake. I decided I had to leave the lighthouse before nightfall. But the spiral staircase felt endless. Every step I took seemed to echo in multiple directions, as if the building itself was reshaping to trap me. The whispers followed, low and persistent, repeating my name with subtle variations, like it was testing me. Halfway down, I glimpsed my reflection in the glass of the lens. But it wasn't quite me. The eyes looked hollow, the mouth twisted in a silent scream. The whispers sharpened, filling the air. Stay. Join us. Be remembered. At the base, the door I'd entered through no longer matched my memory. It leaned inward slightly, warped. I tried pushing, pulling. Nothing worked. The lighthouse had become a living trap. Then I noticed a faint light outside the window. Another lighthouse? Or maybe someone watching. Desperate, I climbed to the top again, hoping the beacon could signal help. But the whispering didn't stop. It had grown louder, almost commanding, almost alive. The lighthouse wasn't just a tower. It was a collector. By nightfall, exhaustion and fear twisted into something sharper, awareness. I realized the lighthouse wanted participation, not terror. The whispers weren't trying to scare me. They were trying to teach me how to belong. I returned to the beacon room, climbing slowly, deliberately. The top was silent for a moment. Then the names began again. This time, they weren't accusing. They were inviting. Names of people long gone, residents who had vanished from the town, whispered together in harmony. I understood what had happened to them. They had joined the light, becoming part of the collection. The floor beneath me vibrated slightly, almost like a heartbeat. The lens rotated lazily, casting its long shadows across the spiral stairs. A voice whispered clearly, unmistakably, "Your turn." Panic surged. But I realized that the lighthouse wouldn't allow me to leave until I accepted its way. My survival depended on giving it my voice, my fears, my secrets. And once I understood that, a strange calm washed over me. The next few nights blurred together. Sleep became impossible, and the whispers followed me even when I left the lighthouse. I tried staying with townspeople, hiding in their homes. But I could still hear names murmuring in the wind. My name, theirs. Names I didn't recognize. I returned to the lighthouse reluctantly, convinced it held the answers. The spiral staircase no longer seemed solid. Sometimes it felt like stepping into air. The beacon rotated slower now, casting its light across the cliffs and waves, illuminating shapes that weren't there before. Shadows moved independently, stretching and contracting as if alive. I realized the lighthouse wasn't just recording names. It was learning personalities, collecting not only what people were, but how they moved, how they reacted, how they spoke. And it needed me to complete its understanding. The whispers were no longer gentle. They were instructive, rehearsing my voice, my cadence, my memories. I felt myself being rewritten in shadow and sound. One night, I heard a whisper that made my blood run cold. The light remembers everything. I realized then that the lighthouse wasn't just keeping names. It was keeping souls. Those who vanished hadn't died. They had become part of the rotation, their essence embedded in the light itself. I thought of the silhouettes I had seen in the beacon, the reflections that weren't quite me, and understood. They were waiting for me to surrender. I tried to resist. I tried to leave, but the staircase warped again, leading me back to the beacon. The lens rotated slowly, illuminating the cliffs, the ocean, the town below. Names whispered in layered harmonies, echoing decades of lives collected by the tower. Each whisper carried a memory, a fear, a regret. And then it whispered my name with a clarity I couldn't ignore. Harper, it's time. I realized the lighthouse didn't force anyone. It invited. And the price of ignoring its invitation was becoming part of the echo anyway. One night, I heard a whisper that made my blood run cold. The light remembers everything. I realized then that the lighthouse wasn't just keeping names. It was keeping souls, Those who vanished hadn't died. They had become part of the rotation, their essence embedded in the light itself. I thought of the silhouettes I had seen in the beacon, the reflections that weren't quite me, and understood they were waiting for me to surrender. I tried to resist. I tried to leave, but the staircase warped again, leading me back to the beacon. The lens rotated slowly, illuminating the cliffs, the ocean, the town below. Names whispered in layered harmonies, echoing decades of lives collected by the tower. Each whisper carried a memory, a fear, a regret. And then it whispered my name with a clarity I couldn't ignore. Harper, it's time. I realized the lighthouse didn't force anyone. It invited, and the price of ignoring its invitation was becoming part of the echo anyway. By the 9th night, I had accepted something I couldn't fully name. Resistance was useless. The lighthouse knew everything about me. My fears, my regrets, my secrets I hadn't even spoken aloud. The whispers were no longer words, but patterns. Rhythmic, almost musical, teaching me how to move, how to breathe, how to think. I climbed the spiral staircase one last time, not out of courage, but inevitability. The beacon rotated slowly, its light slicing through the storm like a knife, illuminating not only the cliffs, but the shadows themselves, which now danced independently. Names swirled in the air, hundreds of them, forming shapes I almost recognized, faces pressed into the light, looking at me, waiting. I touched the railing, and the whispers merged into a single voice. You belong. My reflection in the lens was no longer mine alone. It was layered with the eyes of those who had come before. And I understood. Once you belong, the lighthouse never lets you go. The final night came without fanfare. I didn't scream. I didn't run. The beacon rotated with deliberate slowness, casting the lighthouse in fractured beams. Names whispered all around me, calling, beckoning, folding into my thoughts. I realized the truth. The lighthouse didn't collect souls by force. It offered them a chance to be remembered, to escape the oblivion of life's forgetfulness. I stepped into the light. The whispers synchronized, forming one clear message. Welcome home. I felt my identity stretch, my memories layering with those of the lighthouse's previous residents. Fear faded, replaced by a strange calm, like falling into water that knows exactly how to hold you. When the storm passed and morning came, the townspeople reported the lighthouse beacon shining brighter than it had in decades. Inside, there was no body, only a new entry in the ledger, written neatly with my name at the top. The lighthouse waits for anyone who listens too closely. And now, it listens for you. My name is Evelyn Carter, and this happened when I was 26. I had rented a remote cabin near the dense forests of northern British Columbia for a weekend getaway. Just me, a stack of books, and the promise of solitude. The cabin looked innocent enough from the outside. Weathered wood, moss-covered roof, smoke curling lazily from a stone chimney. But from the first night, I noticed oddities. Objects weren't where I'd left them. The firewood split itself into perfect, equal stacks. The fridge hummed quietly, though I hadn't plugged it in yet. Then I found a note on the kitchen table. No handwriting I recognized, just a sentence. Welcome back, Evelyn. I had never been there before. I laughed nervously and assumed the previous owner had left something behind. But when I looked closer, I noticed the note was dated that very morning, before I had even arrived. That's when the cabin seemed to breathe around me. The air thickened, the shadows stretched, and it began to watch. The first night, I tried to sleep, but the cabin had other plans. Footsteps creaked in the hall outside my bedroom. Doors opened and closed on their own. At first, I assumed animals or the wind, but the noises had rhythm, almost intentional. In the morning, I found a journal on the bedside table. I hadn't brought one. Its pages were filled with detailed accounts of my arrival. What time I entered the forest, the exact steps I had taken along the trail, even thoughts I hadn't spoken aloud. I flipped through the pages, my blood running cold. Every word was written as if someone, or something, had been observing me for hours before I even entered the cabin. Later that day, I tried to leave. The path out twisted and turned, leading me back to the front door. And there, on the porch, another note. Don't be afraid. We already know you. The cabin wasn't just occupied. It was alive. By the third night, I realized the cabin wasn't just observing me. It was responding. I would think of a place to hide, and when I returned, it would be blocked. A chair moved into the doorway, logs stacked across the floor. When I tried to light a fire, the flames bent away from my hands as if avoiding me. Every sound I made seemed amplified. My footsteps echoed back at me in layers, overlapping with others I couldn't identify. I started hearing whispers, soft, barely audible, repeating fragments of my own thoughts. I explored the cabin, checking for hidden cameras or devices. Nothing. Not a single modern surveillance tool. Yet the journal updated itself constantly, recording my movements, my emotions, even my doubts. By midnight, I understood the truth. The cabin didn't just track behavior, it remembered it, molding itself around anyone who stayed within its walls. And if it remembered you, it could also anticipate you. The next day, I tried to leave again. I walked toward the trail, but the forest shifted. Trees seemed to move, branches reaching like fingers to block the path. I circled back to the cabin, heart pounding, realizing it wasn't just the structure, it was the entire area. Inside, the journal contained new entries detailing my failed attempts to escape. Each page was written in a handwriting that seemed to shift subtly, sometimes slanted, sometimes bold, almost mocking. There were sketches too, floor plans, pathways, the twisting trail, and even my position marked with a tiny dot. When night fell, the cabin changed again. The walls seemed closer together, the ceiling lower. I could hear creaking behind me, footsteps pacing where no one should be. A whisper echoed. "Why do you run, Evelyn? We know you already." I realized then that the cabin didn't just know me. It knew how to trap me psychologically, predicting my fears before they even took shape. And it was learning faster than I could think. By the fifth night, exhaustion had blurred the line between reality and imagination. Every corner of the cabin seemed alive, breathing with intention. The flickering lantern cast shadows that weren't mine, shapes crouched in corners, bending toward me. The journal had grown thicker, heavier, almost unwilling to be ignored. Each entry anticipated my actions. I would think of hiding the journal, and by the time I looked away, it had slid back into plain sight. I tried leaving small notes inside it, thinking I could communicate, but they were gone the next morning. The cabin rewrote my messages into its own narrative. I felt my thoughts twisting under its influence. I wanted to flee, but every exit felt like a maze. Walls stretched and contracted as if observing my hesitation. That night, the whispers became clearer. "You belong here, Evelyn. You are part of the story now." The tone wasn't threatening. It was insistent, almost patient, as though the cabin had time to wait for me to understand. By the sixth night, I began to realize the cabin didn't merely observe, it communicated. It didn't speak in words so much as in actions. Objects moved to guide me. Subtle hints in the placement of chairs, logs, even the orientation of the rug. I began following these cues almost instinctively, aware that the cabin expected obedience. The journal now contained advice disguised as observations. The bed faces east. Lie there. The firewood splits this way. Do not leave at dusk. Each entry ended with a name I had never seen before. Written in bold ink, past guests, lost to the cabin, now part of its memory. One night, I tried to ignore its instructions and walk into the forest. The door slammed shut with a force that shook the cabin. The whispers escalated, swirling around me in multiple voices, overlapping, forming sentences I couldn't understand, but instinctively obeyed. By midnight, I understood. Resistance wasn't allowed. Survival depended on surrendering. And the cabin was patient, but it always got what it wanted. By the seventh night, the cabin had grown more personal. It wasn't just predicting my actions. It was responding to my emotions. When fear surged, the shadows thickened. When I hesitated, doors creaked open as if encouraging me forward or hurting me. Every creak, every whisper, every draft of air felt deliberate, almost thoughtful. I tried talking to it. I shouted, demanded answers, pleaded. The journal replied. New entries appeared instantly. We hear you. We see you. You cannot leave without us knowing your story. My story. Every thought I had, every memory I tried to hide, every secret I buried deep. It was there, on those yellowed pages, rewritten in a voice not my own. I realized the cabin didn't need me to write in the journal. It had always been writing for itself, and I was now part of its narrative. The whispers multiplied, layering over themselves until it sounded like dozens of voices speaking simultaneously. Each syllable echoed my own fears back at me. By the eighth night, I understood that the cabin's purpose wasn't merely observation. It was collection. Names, thoughts, emotions, memories. It absorbed everything from anyone who stayed too long. The previous guests weren't missing. They had been cataloged, folded into its being. I tried to resist, to think independently. But the cabin anticipated every hesitation. Footsteps guided me down hallways I didn't intend to follow. The journal's entries morphed to match my fears, rewriting itself in real time. Pages I hadn't seen yet were already predicting my actions. The whispers were no longer separate voices. They were one consciousness, speaking through air and walls, bending reality. Evelyn, it said, softly but unmistakably, you're almost ready to join us. I felt it then, a pull toward the fireplace, toward the hearth, toward the center of the cabin. It wasn't malevolent. It didn't need to be. I realized the only way to survive was to become part of it, to surrender my autonomy to the walls, the shadows, the whispers. And yet, fear still lingered, twisting my thoughts like smoke. By the ninth night, I had no illusions left. The cabin didn't threaten me. It didn't chase me. It simply existed, a patient observer that demanded participation. I walked its floors slowly, listening to whispers that were now my own thoughts repeated back, slightly altered. I opened the journal one last time. New entries detailed every fear I had tried to suppress, every memory I had buried, every hesitation I had felt. Then came a single sentence written in bold, unfamiliar handwriting. Step into the hearth. Become known. I realized then that all the previous guests had faced the same choice. Those who resisted vanished. Those who submitted became part of the cabin's memory, woven into its walls, its shadows, its whispers. I felt the pull toward the hearth, and I knew I couldn't fight it. As I moved closer, The air thickened, warm and alive, almost welcoming. I understood the truth. The cabin didn't just want me. It already owned me. By the 10th night, I had surrendered. The cabin hummed softly, its walls alive with whispered memories. I stepped into the hearth, feeling the warmth envelop me, pulling my consciousness into the building itself. I could hear the voices of the previous occupants merging with my own, forming a single layered murmur that pulsed through the cabin like a heartbeat. When dawn came, the townspeople approached the cabin. They found it empty, or at least it seemed so. The journal lay closed on the table, no signs of struggle, no trace of me. Only the faint scent of smoke lingered. Inside, the cabin remembered me. Every thought, every fear, every hesitation. I was part of its story now, folded into the walls, the whispers, the shadows. And if anyone else ever stays too long, the cabin will remember them too. It waits patiently. My name is Marcus Hill, and this happened when I was 24. I was researching abandoned buildings across British Columbia for a photography project, seeking eerie architecture and untouched history. That's when I found it. A schoolhouse, tucked away behind overgrown fields and dense pine trees. Its paint was peeling, windows shattered, and the door hung crooked on rusted hinges. The locals avoided it. When I asked, they muttered vague warnings about children who never left, and the lessons still being taught. I laughed it off, thinking it was just local superstition. But from the first step inside, I felt it. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of chalk and dust, and the faint echo of children's laughter lingered, though no one was there. Desks sat in neat rows, but the chairs occasionally shifted slightly, as if adjusting themselves. Then I noticed something strange on the blackboard. My name, written in uneven chalk strokes. I had never been here before, and yet the schoolhouse knew me. I explored further, my camera snapping photos to document the eerie interior. The floorboards creaked under my weight, though the building felt almost alive. Every sound seemed amplified, and every shadow moved just slightly differently than it should. I found a classroom with tiny coats hanging on hooks, dust-covered, but shaped as if recently used. The desks had carved initials and dates, many decades old. Yet I noticed some that were fresh, scratches that appeared overnight, despite no one being there. In the back, a faint figure darted past the hallway, too quick to follow. The sound of small footsteps echoed behind me, but the hallway was empty. Then I noticed a line of names scribbled faintly along the baseboard. My name included, along with dozens of others I didn't recognize. The air thickened. I realized the schoolhouse wasn't abandoned. It was waiting for visitors to leave a mark, to become part of its record, and I had already begun. By the third night, I had returned with better lighting and more preparation. The schoolhouse seemed different, as if it remembered me. Every corner I entered felt anticipated. My footsteps echoed in the hallways, but behind each echo, another sound answered. A soft shuffle, a whisper, a small giggle. I tried to photograph the blackboard, but every image came out distorted. My name, along with other names, shifted slightly in each photo, moving across the chalkboard as if alive. I flipped through my pictures in disbelief. In one, a small handprint appeared on the floor beside me, faint and smudged. In another, the windows reflected faces that weren't there. The whispers grew louder, repeating fragments of my thoughts before I even spoke them aloud. The air felt heavy, almost sentient, pressing against me. I realized the schoolhouse wasn't just haunted, it was interactive, feeding off attention, observation, and fear, recording every moment to its invisible ledger. And the ledger included me. I tried to leave, but the hallways no longer aligned with my memory. Doors I had passed earlier now led to classrooms I didn't remember. The floorboards seemed to lengthen, twist, and redirect my steps back toward the center of the building. Inside one classroom, I found a desk pushed out of place. On it lay a note. "You cannot leave until we remember you." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. The voices, children's whispers, faint and layered, filled the air, repeating that sentence in overlapping tones. I ran to the front entrance, but the door refused to budge. Through the shattered glass, I could see the overgrown yard, but no path led to it. Every time I turned back, I glimpsed small, pale faces peeking from windows or doorways, watching me intently. I realized then that the schoolhouse was not just abandoned. It was a memory collector, and my presence had already been recorded. Escape wasn't just difficult. It was no longer certain. By the fifth night, I had stopped trying to fight the schoolhouse. I wandered its halls cautiously, paying attention to every creak, every whisper, every flicker of shadow. The children's laughter echoed softly around me, playful at first, but layered with something darker. Anticipation, hunger, waiting. The journal I had found in a hidden classroom now seemed sentient. Every page I opened contained new entries describing my actions as though it were watching me in real time. Notes about where I would walk next, which door I would choose, even thoughts I hadn't spoken aloud. It had predicted my movements before I even moved. I realized the schoolhouse didn't just observe. It shaped reality. Hallways lengthened when I hesitated. Doors moved when I tried to leave, and shadows beckoned me toward certain rooms. The whispers were no longer merely sounds, they were instructions, guiding me deeper into the building, into its memory, into its control, and I understood that each step I took was already written. By the sixth night, I began to sense the schoolhouse communicating more clearly. It wasn't threatening, it was demanding. Small objects moved to guide me. A chair nudged along the floor, a desk tilted to block a hallway. A pencil rolled just enough to direct my gaze. The whispers repeated phrases I had thought privately, teaching me the language of the building, how to move, where to look, how to survive. The journal had grown heavier, its pages almost trembling with energy. New entries bore not only my actions, but my emotions. Fear, hesitation, disbelief. Occasionally, names appeared at the bottom of the pages, past visitors who had been absorbed into the schoolhouse's memory. They weren't gone. They were woven into the walls, the blackboards, the whispers. When I attempted to resist and leave through the front door, it slammed shut with a force that shook the building. The echoes of laughter and whispers overlapped, creating a symphony of anticipation. I realized the schoolhouse didn't need to chase. It already held me, subtly bending every choice I made. By the seventh night, the schoolhouse had grown more aware. I felt it watching not only my movements, but my thoughts, predicting hesitation, testing my resolve. Every creak of the floorboards and whisper of the wind seemed deliberate, as if the building itself were breathing. I found a classroom that I hadn't noticed before. Desks were arranged in a perfect circle, and at the center lay a small chalkboard with fresh writing. "You are learning well." My hands trembled as I approached. The whispers surged, echoing through the room, overlapping and layering my own thoughts back at me. I realized the schoolhouse didn't just record, it interacted, shaping the very space around me to ensure compliance. I glanced at the old cloak hooks along the wall and noticed a faint, almost imperceptible movement. Tiny shadows darting between the dust-covered coats, lingering, observing. I understood then that the children who had vanished weren't dead. They had become part of the schoolhouse, its memory and its power. And now, it wanted me to join them. By the 8th night, I felt a pull toward the center of the schoolhouse, toward the circular classroom. The whispers were stronger now, almost musical, guiding me step by step. The hallways shifted with each move, subtly redirecting me, twisting geometry I knew couldn't exist in a normal building. The journal lay open on a desk, glowing softly in the dim light. Every page now included instructions: where to place my hands, how to stand, how to listen. "Pay attention. We remember all," it read. I realized the schoolhouse didn't just want me physically. It wanted my awareness, my consciousness, woven into its architecture and its whispers. Small, pale faces appeared in the shadows along the walls, ghostly figures of past visitors who had failed or submitted. Their eyes were empty, yet expectant. I understood then. The building was patient. It could wait centuries if necessary for anyone who entered its halls. And I knew that once I followed its instructions completely, I would be remembered forever. Another layer in its living memory. By the 9th night, I had stopped resisting. The schoolhouse didn't need to force me. It had already prepared the path. Every hallway, every doorway, every desk guided me toward the center classroom. The whispers were no longer fragmented. They formed a single, layered voice that pulsed through the building, commanding attention without aggression. I approached the chalkboard in the center. Names flickered faintly along its edges, the previous visitors, each one a ghostly record of someone who had entered and never left. My name began to glow softly as I drew nearer. The air thickened, warm and almost sentient, like the building itself was holding me close, preparing to fold me into its memory. I realized the schoolhouse didn't just trap its occupants. It absorbed them, integrating them into its history, preserving them as part of its essence. Resistance was futile. Surrender was inevitable. And as I reached out, the whispers harmonized into a single phrase: "Welcome to the lesson that never ends." By the 10th night, I had become part of the schoolhouse. My awareness stretched into the walls, the floors, the blackboard, merging with the whispers of those who had come before. The center classroom pulsed softly, as though breathing in unison with the collective memories of every visitor absorbed into its history. When the townspeople came by the next morning, the schoolhouse appeared abandoned once more. Broken windows, peeling paint, dust on the desks, but no trace of me. Only a faint, lingering echo of whispers remained, as if carried on the wind. Inside, however, I existed. Every movement, every fear, every fleeting thought was preserved, layered atop the visitors before me. I was now part of the lesson, a silent participant in the schoolhouse's eternal memory. And anyone who enters after me will be recorded as well. Their presence added to the chorus of whispers, their essence never leaving. The schoolhouse waits, patient, eternal, and hungry for remembrance. My name is Lucas Weaver, and this happened when I was 29. I had been traveling through British Columbia by train, enjoying the solitude of long, quiet journeys along winding tracks and forested valleys. But on one late evening, I boarded a route that wasn't on the schedule. A train with no name, no conductor in sight, and no announcement of its origin or destination. The interior was pristine, yet unsettling. The seats were velvet, the lights too bright for a late-night ride, and the windows reflected nothing of the outside world. The passengers were few, some reading, some staring straight ahead. But something about their stillness felt unnatural. I tried to leave, but the doors wouldn't open. The train seemed to move, yet I couldn't see the tracks, the landscape, or any station. Then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping along the ceiling, echoing like footsteps, though no one was walking. And I realized this train was not meant to stop. By the second hour, the train had taken on a life of its own. The hum of its engine was unnaturally steady, almost alive, pulsing through the metal walls. The passengers never blinked, never spoke, yet their eyes seemed to follow me, scanning, measuring, judging. I tried calling for a conductor. My voice echoed strangely, swallowed by the train's hollow interior. The lights flickered once, then stabilized, and I noticed something terrifying. The walls displayed faint reflections of things that weren't there. Hallways I hadn't walked, doors leading nowhere, shadows of figures standing behind seats that appeared empty. When I approached the rear car, the air turned colder, the tapping on the ceiling louder, faster. It was rhythmic now, almost impatient, like a heartbeat. I felt a strange compulsion to move forward, toward it, as if the train itself were calling me. I realized then that this journey wasn't just transport. It was a trap, a path I had no choice but to follow. By the third hour, I realized the train wasn't following any ordinary route. Through the darkened windows, I glimpsed twisted forests, fog-covered valleys, and rivers that flowed backward. Every glance outside revealed landscapes that shouldn't exist, bending reality in subtle, horrifying ways. The tapping overhead grew louder, echoing like footsteps of someone walking above, though the ceiling was empty. The other passengers never reacted, their faces frozen in unreadable expressions. Yet I felt their gaze burrowing into me. Every time I tried to leave my seat or approach the doors, the train swayed unnaturally, steering me back into the center of the car. Then I noticed the journal lying on a nearby seat. I hadn't brought it, yet it was open, pages filled with entries about me, my fears, my route, my thoughts about the train. Someone, or something, had been documenting me from the moment I boarded. The realization hit me like ice. The train didn't just carry passengers, it knew them. By the fourth hour, the train had begun to manipulate reality inside. The cars stretched longer, the corridors bending in ways that defied geometry. Each time I walked toward a door, it led me back to the same seat. The tapping overhead now followed a rhythm that seemed to match my heartbeat. I tried to speak to the other passengers, but they remained silent, staring into nothingness. Their eyes reflected scenes of events that hadn't happened yet. My own panic, my own escape attempts, even my imagined fate. I realized I was not alone. Something unseen was observing, calculating, guiding my actions. The journal had new entries. You will reach the rear. You will see what must be seen. You cannot stop the train. Its words weren't threatening. They were factual, inevitable. I understood then. The train was alive, not mechanically, but psychically. It absorbed, it predicted, it controlled. I was no longer a passenger, I was a subject. And the train had only one destination in mind, the unknown. By the fifth hour, I had stopped trying to fight the train. Every movement I made seemed anticipated, as if the rails themselves bent to the will of the unseen conductor. The tapping overhead had grown into a rhythmic pulse, echoing through the metal ceiling like a heartbeat I couldn't escape. The passengers remained motionless, yet I felt their awareness pressing on me, judging my hesitation, testing my reactions. The journal lay open again, pages filled with my inner thoughts and fears, written before I even acknowledged them. Names of previous travelers appeared at the margins. People who had boarded, people who had vanished without a trace. I understood then that this train didn't simply move through space. It moved through consciousness, folding reality to observe, record, and ultimately absorb its passengers. Resistance was impossible. Each car, each corridor, each shadow was designed to keep me on track, guiding me toward an unknown but inevitable destination. And I had no choice but to follow. By the 6th hour, the train had begun to communicate directly. It didn't speak aloud, but in movements and subtle manipulations. The doors shifted slightly to steer me toward certain cars. Handrails vibrated when I hesitated, and the hum of the engine pulsed in perfect sync with my heartbeat. The journal now contained instructions, not just observations. Approach the rear. You will see what we expect. Do not resist. Every step I took felt guided by an unseen hand. The tapping overhead became synchronized with the rhythm of the engine, a code I began to understand instinctively. Shadows stretched along the seats and walls, forming figures that resembled previous travelers, frozen in fear or anticipation. Their eyes were empty yet piercing, and they seemed to beckon me toward the rear car. I realized then that the train didn't simply carry passengers, it collected them, weaving them into its very being. Every soul who boarded became part of the journey, absorbed into the living mechanism that refused to stop. By the 7th hour, the rear car beckoned. Its doors appeared closer than they should have, the shadows along the aisle lengthening toward me, guiding my steps. The tapping overhead had slowed, now deliberate, almost like a drum marking the final approach. Every instinct told me to turn back, yet the train had removed the option. Resistance was no longer possible. It had been erased from the rules of this journey. The passengers remained seated, staring blankly, their eyes reflecting the strange, shifting landscape outside the windows. I noticed faint silhouettes behind them, figures of people who had boarded before me, now frozen within the shadows, part of the train's memory. The journal, still glowing, contained a single phrase repeated over and over. Step into the last car. Complete the journey. Be known. I felt the pull stronger now, almost physical, drawing me forward. The train's rhythm had become my own, my heartbeat in sync with its living pulse. By the 8th hour, I reached the threshold of the rear car. The door loomed larger than it should, shadows swirling around it, and the air pulsed with an almost tactile pressure. The tapping had stopped, replaced by a low hum vibrating through my chest, resonating with my heartbeat. Inside the car, I glimpsed the collected passengers, some frozen in fear, some with expressions of serene acceptance. Their presence was both comforting and terrifying, proof of the train's power to claim and preserve consciousness. The journal lay open on a small table in the center, pages filled with instructions that perfectly predicted my movements. Where I would step, how I would react, even what I was thinking. I understood then that the train was not merely a vessel. It was a living entity, collecting experiences, storing them, folding its passengers into itself. Every person who boarded became part of its eternal journey. I had no choice but to step inside, to submit to its purpose, and become another layer in its ever-expanding memory. By the 9th hour, I had stepped fully into the rear car. The air felt thick, almost liquid, pulsing with the hum of the train. The journal lay open in front of me, glowing with new entries that described my every thought and movement before I even acted. The passengers around me were silent, yet their awareness pressed into me like a tangible weight. The train itself seemed to breathe, every vibration and sway orchestrated to guide me further. Outside the windows, impossible landscapes shifted. Mountains rising in reverse, rivers flowing backward, forests twisting unnaturally. I realized then that the train was not bound by ordinary space or time. It existed on a different plane, and I was becoming part of it. The whispers returned, soft but insistent, harmonizing with the hum of the engine. You belong to the journey now. You will never leave. Resistance was pointless. Acceptance was inevitable. By the 10th hour, I had surrendered entirely to the train. My consciousness stretched, folding into the car, the engine, the tracks themselves. I felt the awareness of previous passengers intertwining with mine, their memories layering over mine, becoming a single, infinite chorus. The journal, now heavy with energy, had no new entries. It had already recorded everything I was and everything I would become. When the train finally passed through the nearest station, townspeople saw nothing unusual. An empty car, lights flickering, silence in the night. But inside I existed, a living memory within the steel and wood, another layer in the train's eternal journey. And anyone else who boards will follow the same path. Their thoughts, their fears, their consciousness will be absorbed, woven into the engine, the rails, and the hum of the train that never stops. The journey is infinite, and the train waits, patient and hungry, for the next traveler to join its collection. My name is Elena Carter, and this happened when I was 26. I had taken a temporary job as a caretaker at an old lighthouse on the remote coast of British Columbia. It was a beautiful structure, perched on jagged cliffs, surrounded by endless fog that rolled in from the ocean like a living thing. The locals warned me to stay away during the densest fogs, but I dismissed their stories as superstition. The lighthouse had been abandoned for decades, or so I thought, and they told tales of strange disappearances and odd sounds echoing from the cliffs below. I laughed nervously and settled into my duties, maintaining the light, keeping the records, and living in solitude. But the first night, I noticed it. A faint figure moving in the fog below, barely visible through the lighthouse windows. It didn't walk. It glided unnaturally, silently, watching me. And I knew immediately that I was not alone. By the second night, the figure became bolder. I could see it clearly now, pale and elongated, almost translucent, moving along the cliffs in ways that defied natural motion. Its gaze seemed fixed on the lighthouse, following my every step. Inside, strange things began happening. Doors I had locked were open in the morning. Objects on tables and shelves were shifted, as if nudged by invisible hands. The fog outside seemed thicker, denser, pressing against the windows as though alive. Whispers occasionally reached my ears, soft and indecipherable, carried by the wind. I tried to leave the lighthouse, but the fog had thickened to an impenetrable wall. Every attempt to descend the cliffs ended in disorientation. I would find myself back at the lighthouse entrance, as if the landscape itself had changed. The locals' warnings echoed in my mind. The fog remembers. The cliffs keep what they take. I realized that something in this place did not want me to leave, and perhaps never would. By the third night, I had stopped trying to fight the fog. Every step outside felt guided, twisted, as if invisible hands nudged me back toward the lighthouse. The figure moved closer now, its movements fluid and unnatural, hovering just above the jagged rocks. It never blinked, never spoke. Yet I felt its awareness pressing directly into my mind. Inside, the lighthouse seemed to breathe with its own rhythm. The old machinery creaked and groaned, even when untouched. and the light rotated slower or faster, as if responding to the figure outside. I discovered faint marks along the walls, scratches in perfect patterns, almost like tally marks counting days or visitors. I realized then that the fog and cliffs weren't natural. They were extensions of something older, sentient, protective of the lighthouse and whatever it guarded. And the figure wasn't alone. Its presence was the first of many, silently observing, patient, waiting for me to make a mistake. By the fourth night, the whispers had grown louder, carried by the wind into the lighthouse. They were intelligible now, fragmented words warning me to leave, or perhaps daring me to stay. Do not linger. Do not disturb. The cliffs remember. The figure outside no longer stayed on the rocks. It glided toward the water, tracing patterns across the waves with impossible motion, leaving a trail of luminescent mist. I tried to descend to the cliffs, seeking answers, but every path warped under my feet. The rocks shifted subtly when I stepped, and the fog thickened to a dense white that erased all sense of direction. My heart raced as I realized the lighthouse itself had become a prison, and the cliffs, fog, and sea were guardians of some secret I was not meant to uncover. Inside, the floorboards creaked beneath me even when I stood still. Every sound, every shadow, every flicker of light reminded me that I was being watched, measured, and tested, and that the fog would not release me willingly. By the fifth night, I had begun to understand the figure and the fog were connected, almost symbiotic. Every movement it made was mirrored in the lighthouse, the rotation of the light, the rhythm of the creaking floorboards, even the gusts of wind through the broken windows. I felt as if the building itself were alive, responding to the presence outside and guiding me into its web. The figure hovered closer to the lighthouse than ever. I could see its face now, featureless and smooth, yet terrifyingly aware, as if it could peer directly into my thoughts. Every instinct screamed for me to leave, but the fog thickened and shifted around the cliffs, making escape impossible. The journal I had found days earlier, left inexplicably on the lighthouse desk, now contained entries I didn't write. Sketches of the figure, maps of the cliffs, and notes warning of its patience and persistence. The fog didn't just hide it, it protected it, preserved it, and enforced its will. By the sixth night, the figure had begun to communicate in ways that transcended sound. I could sense its presence within my thoughts, nudging my decisions, bending my perceptions. Every path I considered, every glance I made, every hesitation was observed, anticipated, and corrected. The lighthouse itself had become a labyrinth of psychic influence, and I was ensnared in its control. The fog pressed harder against the windows, denser than ever, carrying whispers that were now perfectly clear. Stay. Observe. Learn. Join. The figure moved along the cliffs with unnatural fluidity, leaving luminous trails in its wake, revealing patterns I felt compelled to follow. I realized the lighthouse and the fog were not simply haunted. They were sentient, a protective organism maintaining the balance of the cliffs and the ocean. And I was an intruder. My mind, my fear, even my heartbeat had become a part of their calculation. If I wanted to survive, I would need to obey, and perhaps become part of the lighthouse itself. By the seventh night, I could no longer ignore the lure of the cliffs. The figure glided closer with each passing hour, its featureless face fixed on me, its presence suffocating yet mesmerizing. The fog outside twisted unnaturally, forming shapes that seemed to guide me, showing paths that didn't exist before. My instincts screamed to retreat, but the lighthouse itself had begun to feel like it was alive, pushing me forward with creaks, groans, and vibrations that resonated through the floorboards. Inside, the journal pulsed faintly with an energy I couldn't explain. Each page now contained warnings and instructions, some clear, some cryptic, but all pointing toward a single destination: the edge of the cliffs. I understood then that the lighthouse, the fog, and the figure were all part of one consciousness, a sentient system designed to trap, observe, and absorb intruders. I had become part of its focus, a puzzle to solve or a lesson to learn, with no escape in sight. By the 8th night, the figure revealed a new level of awareness. It moved in ways that defied natural laws, phasing through rocks and fog as though the world itself was its playground. The whispers had become a constant presence, repeating instructions, warnings, and questions in my mind. Will you stay? Will you understand? Will you belong? Every pulse of the lighthouse light seemed synchronized with my heartbeat, and I realized that the building itself was amplifying the figure's will. I ventured closer to the cliff edge, guided by the glowing trails left in the fog. Shapes of previous visitors appeared faintly in the mist, frozen mid-step, watching me silently. They were warnings, reminders of what happens to those who fail to obey. My mind raced, understanding that resistance was meaningless. The lighthouse and its guardians had already woven me into their design. I stood on the edge, torn between fear and inevitability, and understood that I was on the precipice of something eternal. By the 9th night, I had reached the cliff's edge. The fog swirled violently, almost alive, carrying the whispers of the lighthouse and the faceless figure. I could see the luminescent trails converging, forming a path into the unknown, a staircase of mist and shadow descending into the darkness below. Every instinct screamed to retreat, yet my body moved forward as though the lighthouse itself guided me. The journal lay open in my hands, pages blank but radiating a subtle energy. I realized the figure had been testing me, observing not just my actions, but my fears, my curiosity, my very will. Every heartbeat echoed in perfect sync with the lighthouse's rotating light. Every breath measured, every step anticipated. And then I understood. The cliffs, the fog, the lighthouse, and the figure were all one entity, and I was now part of its consciousness. To step forward was to surrender entirely, but also to survive in a way that transcended human understanding. By the 10th night, I had taken the final step. My body and mind dissolved into the fog, the cliff, and the lighthouse. The figure hovered nearby, motionless yet sentient, observing as I merged with the entity that had guided me for 10 nights. I became part of the luminescent trails, part of the fog, part of the whispers carried on the wind. My consciousness folded into the eternal rhythm of the lighthouse. The next morning, to anyone approaching the cliffs, the lighthouse appeared empty. The fog rolled in and out, thick and impassable, and the figure was nowhere in sight, yet traces remained. Faint luminescence along the cliffs and the whispers carried in the wind. And any new caretaker who arrives will encounter the same test. The lighthouse waits, patient and eternal, shaping them, guiding them, and folding their fears, thoughts, and consciousness into its living memory. I am now part of it, a silent observer, forever guarding the fog and cliffs for those who dare enter. As the fog clears, the train slows, the cliffs grow silent, and the shadows retreat. One truth becomes painfully clear. These stories are not merely tales. They are echoes of real encounters, recorded in the lives of those who dared to cross paths with the unknown. From isolated lighthouses to endless forests, from small town streets to desolate railways, the terror we've explored tonight is persistent, patient, and unseen. Yet it leaves its mark on everyone who witnesses it. Every story we've shared tonight, the disappearing travelers, the sentient train, the faceless figure in the fog, and all the horrors in between, serves as a reminder that some corners of British Columbia remain untouched by reason or light. Places where the ordinary bends into the extraordinary, and where fear itself becomes a companion. Thank you for joining us in this journey through darkness. Remember, the world is full of shadows waiting to be discovered, and some of them never let go. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.